Welcome to Rebuilding LA After the Fires. I'm Jan Bresky, and in this podcast, I explore how Los Angeles recovers from the recent devastating wildfires. In each episode, I sit down with developers, community leaders, and other real estate professionals to uncover what it really takes to rebuild homes and neighborhoods. If you're looking to understand what's next for LA, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome to our interview series today, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Leo Marmol, and he is the co-founder of Marmol Radziner. I've been in LA for about 20 years in the real estate industry, and his firm is well-known, well-regarded. Leo, welcome.
Thank you, Jan. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'd like to start with your personal background and your company. You've obviously built one of the most prominent architecture firms in Los Angeles, and you're involved in the fire zone rebuild, and we're going to get to some other topics that I think you and I share a passion for, housing and how we can make housing more attainable. But let's just start with your career. And you started this when you were pretty young, didn't you?
Very young. Ron Radziner and I started working together in 1989, very modestly. It was the two of us with one person helping, and just have organically grown our services and our company over the decades. And more than anything, I've had the privilege of working with some incredible clients who really pushed us to do our best work.
And paint a picture of what Marmol Radziner is today. I know you're an architecture firm, but I think you do some other services beyond that as well. Is that right?
That's right. We're a unique office in that, first and foremost, we provide architectural services. But in support of the architecture, we also provide landscape architecture services, full interior design services, and we are a general contractor. So we provide construction services. And with our construction operations, we self-perform many trades like concrete, finished carpentry, landscape installation, but we also have a large cabinet shop and metal shop in El Segundo that produces millwork, furniture. So we're a very multifaceted group of individuals. There are many of us. There are about 240 people in the organization. But what's so fascinating is that we sometimes provide full services for our residential projects, all the services I just described. But sometimes we act as the landscape architect for teams that have other architectural firms. Sometimes we are doing interior design and landscape. Our general contracting team builds with other architects. Our cabinet shop and metal shop provides services for other general contractors. So it's a very interesting mix of moving parts. And with that, then we have incredibly talented, committed individuals that have been working with us for a long time.
Got it. And give us an idea of roughly how many projects per year you're working on. Is it in the hundreds?
I don't know, but yes, it is a long list of projects. And because it's such a wide mix of projects, there are some where, again, we're just providing landscape architecture, some where we're providing full service, and there's also a mix of building types. We do alterations to existing single-family homes. We do new construction, new single-family homes. We also work in larger commercial environments where we're doing multifamily projects. And we just completed our first high-rise project, an 86-story residential tower in downtown Los Angeles, the Beaudry. And that was the first time we had the opportunity to provide architectural design, landscape design, interior design for a high-rise tower.
Interesting. So I found you because of Case Study 2.0, which is a program to help homeowners that want to rebuild in the Palisades and Altadena to have sort of a catalog of designs that they can choose from that are less expensive than having custom architecture done from scratch just for their own property. But tell us about your involvement in the fire zone rebuild in general. How are you approaching that? It's evident that from what you do, you're going to have some homeowners that come to you and say, "We want to rebuild. Can you do the whole thing?" Because you are one of the small number of firms that could do a custom home soup to nuts for somebody. But how are you involved in the rebuild currently? You'd be a great choice for somebody that wants a full soup to nuts solution. But how are you involved in both fire zones currently?
Sure. Well, I mean, the Palisades Eaton fires represent, without a doubt, the most tragic human experience and the most tragic economic experience that LA County has faced, certainly in our lifetime. And so we were involved very personally. We had friends, colleagues, clients within those burn zones. I live in Venice, so I was spared the actual destruction, but I lived in the Palisades for 7 years and moved from there about 2.5 years ago. So where I was living has been destroyed. And since then, we have met with literally hundreds of families who have lost everything. And fortunately, the life toll was low, which speaks greatly to our first responders and the emergency coordination that took place during the tragedy. That any life is tragic to lose, but when we look at the totality of the destruction, the impact to lives was minimal, thankfully. But the impact to property is overwhelming. And so, yes, we've been meeting with hundreds of people, helping them assess um, the impacts, the process. We've done a number of presentations to different groups as to what the process is. There are literally thousands of people learning a new language of communication, new jargon, new process that never expected to need to hire an architect or understand what it is to build a home. And so, most of our effort has just been an educational one, just making ourselves available to help people understand the process and navigate through.
Mm. And what would you say would be a couple of the top observations that you have so far? We're about 8 months in from the fires, and you've been talking to the city, you've been talking to, you have teams of people that are talking to potential clients. And what are you seeing so far if you had to sort of give a couple of highlights of observations related to the rebuild that you've seen so far? Because you're in a unique position and a special position to assess what are the obstacles, what are the things that we could do better as a community, as a local government. And I know that you're in front of local government every day as a company with requesting approvals to move forward with projects. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but one of the purposes of this podcast was to get our arms around the obstacles to rebuilding and figure out how we can clear some of those obstacles. So what are you seeing so far, Leo?
Tremendous goodwill. There is nothing but a desire to help the thousands of families that have been impacted by the fire. But if we're learning anything, it's that our system of approval, our process of evaluation, our way in which we get things built is broken. Our system is not functional. If the goal is to execute construction and continue to allow our city to grow and develop, we've gone the opposite direction and we've created an environment in which delay is the reaction to the process. So the fire is an opportunity to help us understand the roadblocks and delays, clear them for the individual homeowners that have suffered in this tragedy, and then, in my opinion, apply them to the entire city We also have to remember that the Palisades fire impacted 3 jurisdictions. We often talk about the city of Los Angeles, but the Palisades fire also impacted the county of Los Angeles and the city of Malibu. So we have 3 jurisdictions within the Palisades fire zone, and we have to add the California Coastal Commission because that too overlays its jurisdiction along the coastline. So the Palisades is well within that. The
Right.
Palisade,
I was reading one of your a brief about some community meetings where you've spoken and urged people to look up their property on Zymus and see which of the coastal commission zones it's in. Maybe you could spend just 1 minute, 30 seconds or 1 minute explaining what is the coastal commission for people that don't know, and how to, there's multiple layers of coastal commission sort of challenges depending on which zone you're in, right?
well, first of all, I have a political bias. You invited me here, so it's hard for me to talk about the Coastal Commission without allowing my emotional bias and my political bias to impact my response. The Coastal Commission was established to protect public access to the California coastline. Who's going to argue with that? Of course, that is a resource that is so valuable and so important to all of us that choose to live here and choose to vacation and visit here. What has happened over time, like so many bureaucracies, is that mission has crept. It has expanded, and we now see the California Coastal Commission involved in housing policy and commercial development policy well into the coastline. So Pacific Palisades has 4 distinct coastal zones. One outside the coastal zone. Those are the very lucky properties. The ones, however, are away from the bluffs and the views. Then there are 2 coastal zones within the jurisdiction. And out of that, the coastal zone has also extracted certain properties as a categorical exemption. So there's properties outside the zone, there are categorical exemptions within the zone, and then there are 2 separate zones. One that has to process the coastal land use plan through the city, and others that have dual jurisdiction that they're going to go through the city coastal process and the state coastal process. And we also have to keep in mind that even if you're within that and you process through that, you're still vulnerable to an appeal to the coastal zone. So the coastal zone, the Coastal Commission has created a bureaucratic process that even for homeowners that are working within their rights have to process through the bureaucracy. And even if they're going to ultimately get their approvals, you may take in a dual coastal zone within the burn area 2 years to get your coastal commission approval.
Okay, this is a good segue, because one of the things we talked about when we met prior to this interview was, why is it so difficult to build in California, and how does that impact attainability of housing, right? And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, on the one hand, there's NIMBYs, not in my backyard. There's neighbors that want to slow down and prevent development. Now, there's a state movement that's trying to counteract that, because, as we've discussed, if everybody says, hey, development's fine as long as it's not near where I live, then we won't have any new housing. But then there's also a kind of a bureaucracy which has grown and taken on a life of its own. And I think that the state government leaders are trying to cut that back, and cut back the sort of like the CEQA was used as a weapon to prevent developments for a long time. They're trying to cut that back. But between the neighbors, not in my backyard, and the state bureaucracy, maybe which one do you think is preventing things from working the way they should, in your view, more right now? And maybe comment on both of those.
Sure. For me, the touchstone literature to turn to is Abundance, the relatively new book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. And I would urge everybody who's interested in these subjects to start with that book, because what we have created within liberal politics is a desire to allow people to have a voice in what happens within their community. That is a wonderful goal. And like we were talking about with the Coastal Commission, these kinds of goals begin as fundamentally positive to our communities. However, what happens over time, especially when our leaders and our laws are governed primarily by lawyers, our ruling class is the majority of which is made up of lawyers, and lawyers produce more laws and paperwork and complexity. That's what they're trained to do, unlike engineers or architects or industrial designers who are trained to make products, things, buildings, boats, ships, tunnels, high-speed rail, freeways, houses. And so what we have done in our desire to give people more of a voice, we've created a bureaucratic complexity that moves toward delay instead of action. So I'm not arguing for elimination of the community voice. I'm arguing for limitation on that voice. CEQA is a great example. CEQA was passed during conservative Republican administrations to protect the environment at the time when our environment was truly under assault by industrial pollutions and rampant development that had a terrible impact to the environment. So we created a law in California that says public projects, when they need approvals, they need to develop an understanding of the environmental impact and mitigate those impacts. And then there was a lawsuit in the beautiful mountains of California that said that that law applied not just to public projects, but to private projects. And now suddenly every construction project in the state of California was potentially eligible to be reviewed by CEQA and needed an environmental review. That process today, fast forward decades, more and more complexity, more and more use by smart environmental lawyers, and now the NIMBY class, who has used laws like CEQA not to protect the environment, but to stop change within their communities. It's complicated because in the 1970s, we also started holding wealth through our homes. The home, you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shelter is a fundamental need. Well, no longer is it just about shelter. Now it's about economic stability. So we've mixed shelter with economic protections and protection and growth of personal wealth. So now anything that threatens that value is a threat to our personal wealth.
Okay,
And so,
I want to pause there for a second. I think what you're saying is, as a native Californian, you're saying some really important stuff here, and I really hope that this gets traction, and we're going to do our best to make sure it does. But California, if it were a country, would be the fourth largest economy in the world, and yet you and I are both very zeroed in on ways in which our state has become dysfunctional. And a good example of that I noticed recently is the high-speed rail between San Francisco and LA. It's really embarrassing how I think now the goal is to open it in 10 years between two cities in the Central Valley, not connecting to any of the major population centers 10 years from now. And it's been going for 10 years, I think. So, in that time, other countries have built high-speed rail from scratch and finished it, and they're operating it now. And so we need to fix some things in our great state, because in spite of our incredible gifts that we have in the state of all kinds, there are some things that are downright dysfunctional now. So to move forward in that direction, what do you think is the number one thing that we could do? Or if we could talk to some potential candidates for leadership positions, what would we want to say to them? Or do we need to recruit more engineers and architects into leadership positions rather than maybe the career politicians who maybe have a legal background who don't see the problem that you and I are seeing? What do you think is the number one thing? Is it reading that book and really acting on what's in that book, Abundance? Is that the right first step, or what are some other early steps? If we could start a little bit of a movement here to fix things that are holding back the state, what would be one or two things that you would advocate for?
Term limits for our politicians, a broader range of professional backgrounds in our politicians. So yes, we do need more than just lawyers at the top helping us make decisions. I'm not saying we don't need lawyers. I'm just saying we need to infuse our politics with other perspectives that are more focused on execution. We need to take tragedies like our wildfires here in Southern California, and use them not just as an understanding of disaster recovery, but to also mix that with lessons about housing policy and find ways to streamline execution and fulfillment of people's dreams about how they want to live, not just within our disaster areas, but in our entire county and state. We need to stop being NIMBYs. Don't be a NIMBY. Go and support projects. Understand that in order for cities to grow, they need to change. And right now, we do need more density within our urban population. If you're interested in sustainability and the health of this planet, if you have a green bone within you, support sustainable development. Build housing that's closer to work centers, which means more density closer to work centers and on transit lines, and go to public hearings and support those projects. Support green technologies for energy development. CEQA is used more often than not to stop green technologies from developing, and bike lanes and other things. So stop misapplying CEQA to things that had no original intention of stopping.
On bike lanes, it's funny because I visited Mexico City for the first time about a year ago, and they have these bike lanes painted green. Many of them have plastic barricades between where the cars are and the bike lane, all over the entire city. And it is such a contrast to Los Angeles, where it's a battle to get any space for bikes that's dedicated space. I mean, it's hard to think of a real dedicated bike lane like they have everywhere in Mexico City. It's hard to think of one in LA, although the Expo Line bike path is a great one. And that's a big improvement if you're a cyclist, as I am. But going back to supporting, you're saying supporting density is part of the solution. What about the movement in Sacramento recently to support more density? For example, SB 9, allowing multiple units on a lot in residential zones. I got to give some credit where credit's due. I think the current governor and some of the people that are in the state assembly have passed some pretty amazing rules and laws. What are your thoughts on SB 9 and the other state bills that are designed to allow for more density?
Oh, I am in complete support of all of those, SB 9, the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit law that allows homeowners to put a second legal unit on their single family property to add density and economic opportunities for homeowners. There have been two recent bills passed and signed by the governor that erode some of the CEQA standards and requirements for infill housing and urban density. So yes, but we just have to keep in mind we're chipping around the edges. I support it. We need to do all of that, but it is possible. And the Palisades and our experience as architects in the Palisades is showing us it's possible. We went in for our first building permit as a fire rebuild. We were within the fully expedited kind of 110% like for like definition. We got a building permit through all the myriad of departments to the city of LA in 6 weeks. That is miraculous. A permit for a home that's allowed by right would normally take months to obtain just to get through the bureaucratic process. So it is possible. We need to allow homeowners in the burn areas to take advantage of those and use those expedited processes. And then we need to apply those processes to the entire city because all of that bureaucracy equals cost. And the real problem that we're facing is a problem, not so much, I'm less interested in economic inequality. I'm more interested in poverty. And the fact of the matter is the majority of our population is house poor. They spend more than 50% of their income on rent or mortgage. And that by definition, they're spending more than 30%. By definition, they are house poor, and most are spending up to 57% of their income on housing. Housing is a fundamental need. I think it is a human right. We are failing to provide our children the opportunity to have economic growth and afford housing.
Well said. Well said. And there are some positive things happening on that front. It's not all bad news, but we have to keep advocating and convincing our neighbors to not be NIMBYs and to allow density even in their own neighborhood, as well as everything else that you mentioned. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. And I do want to emphasize, of all of our guests, I think that you bring so much expertise to this topic and so much experience over decades of building, a large architecture firm that also does these other services. I hope that the people that listen to this that are in positions of power and authority, as well as all the neighbors that have been against development in their own neighborhood, I hope that this will move the needle a little bit, because I think you've paid your dues. You've chosen to live in Venice, which is a dense area, instead of the Palisades, which is a beautiful area that not as dense. And I know that they've opted out of some of the state density laws, and I think that that's a fine decision for that community in this circumstance. But I think we're coming up on our half-hour mark here, and I wanted to just give you one more chance to speak to whatever topic that you want to, that you care deeply about, related to any of the things we've covered on this episode.
Sure. I mean, there is incredible hope. Right now, the majority of the people we're talking to within the burn zones are still going through the trauma of trying to figure out what to do. Only a small percentage have really figured out their initial steps. Most are still negotiating or fighting with their insurance companies, trying to understand the process. And certainly we are here as a company to support people in any way we can, with no intention of even being their architect, just to give them an understanding of the process. I think for those outside the process of building, it is hard to really understand the level of complexity that we now live in our approval process to get anything done, whether it's high-speed rail or housing or urban infrastructure, that the number of departments and agencies and approvals necessary, and no longer do you get one building permit to do a single family house. Usually that involves a number of permits and approvals from dozens of departments, not to mention the utilities that also need to be coordinated with and worked with. It's just an overwhelming process. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, all of that translates into cost. Delay is dollars. And so our housing crisis is not only about not enough, and we're grossly not enough in the US, somewhere between 3.8 and 7 million housing units short. And in the county of LA, probably about 500 housing units short. The goal was set to meet our current need. We need to build about 50,000 new housing units a year. In 2023, 15,000 permits were obtained. So we are not even close.
Less than 1/3 of what's needed.
Not even close. And it's easy for people to get frustrated and angry because we see bond measures and political will and billions of dollars going into issues like homelessness, but the encampments remain because we cannot build housing for our homeless population. So 75,000 people live on the streets every night in LA County, and that's not including the kids that have come back home and they're living in their basements or their parents' sofas because they can't afford to get a place to live, or the 5 or 6 people that have to aggregate themselves to rent a 3-bedroom apartment and afford it that way. So people are on the couches and multiple people in bedrooms. It's a crisis that most of us don't see because we focus on homelessness. That's a piece of the housing equation. The biggest issue is affordability and poverty. And so there's hope because we see it in our disaster response. We're capable. We just need to now take that goodwill, as people deserve that have been so tragically impacted, and realize that those are processes that everyone should have the right to, whether you live in a burn zone or not. Let's learn from our disasters and apply them to the measures within the community.
I really appreciate you using your platform and credibility and experience to explain these complex issues. And Leo, Marmol, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a joy, and let's just leave with a sense of hope because it is possible to build housing if we have the will.
And California has solved some of the biggest problems and come up with some of the biggest innovations anywhere. So we should be able to figure this out as well. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jan.
Thanks for listening to Rebuilding LA After the Fires. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend or neighbor who might benefit. Be sure to check the show notes for links and resources I mentioned today. And join me next time for more important insights into LA's rebuilding efforts.